Most organizations are measuring satisfaction, but they should be measuring trust. Because satisfaction tells us how things felt in the moment, while trust determines what we're going to do next. And the uncomfortable truth is this: most organizations can't actually see trust clearly in their experience today. So they're making decisions with incomplete information. Today, we're going to explore what changes when you can finally see it. My name's Oliver King, and this is CXD, where we explore the art and science of designing customer experiences. In the last episode, we explored why emotion is becoming the defining driver of customer behavior, trust, and ultimately commercial performance. But that raises a much bigger question. If emotion matters this much, how well can we actually see it? And what happens if we can't? Now, I'm joined today by Chris Johnston, founder and CEO of Adoreboard. For over a decade, Chris has been working on a problem most CX leaders know but can't actually solve: the gap between measuring customer experience and proving what it's actually worth. His platform Adoreboard quantifies customer trust and links it directly to revenue impact. And organizations like Allstate, Amazon, Zoom, and PG have used this platform to answer the question boards keep asking themselves: what's this worth? Chris, it's great to have you on.
Ollie, really excited to join you today in what is a really important topic.
Before we get into it, Chris, when you hear that statement, we should be measuring trust, not satisfaction, what's your reaction to that?
You're spot on, Ollie, and I think measuring trust is key for three key reasons. Number one is that trust implicitly implies risk, and measuring risk, as we all know, for keeping our customers is key. Secondly, it puts a number on our customers. So rather than think about our customers as a number, we need to think about them as people. And then finally, we can translate trust to revenue. And I think that's really important to think about this idea of customer revenue impact. Now, it's taken me a decade of research and obviously developing Adoreboard to really get to that place where, from my perspective, sentiment analysis is dead. It's redundant. Thinking about your customers as positive, negative, and neutral is a really kind of blunt instrument. And often we are thinking about chasing satisfaction metrics rather than actually rebuilding customer trust. And then finally, we've become obsessed with our metrics rather than customer obsessed, which is really key.
Chris, those are really big and provocative things you're saying there. So, sentiment analysis is dead. Organizations are chasing metrics, not trust. Um, that the data isn't answering the questions they want. Because I think lots of I mean, that's seismic. Like, lots of organizations would say they're very, very data rich. They have all these dashboards, voice the customer programs, NPS programs, third party reviews. They are awash with data. Surely they should know what they've got. But it's interesting because I'm increasingly thinking, as you're saying there, that perhaps they still don't really see what's going on. I mean, do you think with all this data, they're not able to genuinely understand their customers today? Are there any like big blind spots you think they've got? And is this a data problem, or is it something else?
Great reflection. I think when I speak to senior CX leaders, I'm often surprised by the fact that 95% of the people that we speak to aren't able to define the value of what one customer represents to the organization. And I think that's a really kind of shocking factor, that if you can't put a value on your customer, how you going to grow that and how you going to retain that as well. So it really goes back to this idea of customer value. But I also think about CX professionals that operate in large enterprises typically are in a max of 5 people in their team. So you think about it, like 1.25% of the organization is really focused their day job, getting up every day thinking about customers. So I think there's a broader challenge about thinking how you invest in CX, but also what's holding back. And I think what's holding back this is not necessarily the data, but revenue backed CX insights at board level. So, how can we elevate the CX function to allow them to articulate with confidence the kind of key revenue priorities that are actually going to grow or retain their customers? So, what does this mean? Well, I think it's about revenue backed priorities, board ready decisions, and then finally, it's thinking about how do you communicate that narrative to the different audiences that will actually get funded. It's about improving the CX, but also to be able to do that, you need to secure the budget internally to actually make the customers' lives better.
So what this actually this ability to kind of connect revenue through to customer experience, which is really new and is really hard for organizations up to now to do. What that does is gives CX programs and CX leaders kind of teeth to actually show the impact that they can have, and to, you know, I guess almost measure this in real time, kind of see it actually see it actually happening.
That's key. Now, undoubtedly, your point around data is important. Again, if you're to go back to the research, Forrester indicates that 95% of CX professionals are relying on surveys. So they're thinking about customer to channel rather than touch points. So there's all these challenges and barriers in the organizations, silo of data. But ultimately, I think it comes back to how you're going to prioritize improving the experience that will actually drive a revenue impact.
So let's talk about improving that experience, and a point you made earlier about sort of sentiment analysis being dead. I mean, that what is in your view, what is the role of emotion within customer behavior as it sort of translates through into, you know, that bottom line revenue impact? If sentiment analysis is dead, why are we looking so intently now at emotion?
Well, I think we've evolved. That's the truth. We've evolved with methodologies and also technology, and I think that you know the gap has often been that NPS or any of these single metrics are useful as a directional. It's really getting to the contributing attributes and factors that drive that number. I think sentiment has been an interesting approach to try to answer that question, but fundamentally has not delivered. And I think when I'm interacting with organizations, we know that it's really important to understand the customer behaviors. 80% of the customers' decisions are driven by how they feel. So it really makes good sense to try to put some quantification on that.
So, Chris, one thing I wanted to kind of dig down on a little bit more. It feels like, you know, up until now, NPS, CSAT have been the sort of the dominant things that people have been obsessed about. But we're saying now, aren't we, that actually they should be measuring trust. Now, why is trust the key emotion that should be being measured?
I think there's three layers to this. Number one is that trust is a universal and universally accepted way of understanding customer behavior. If you think about the definition of trust, it's really the willingness of an individual to rely on someone else to take an action where the outcome is not guaranteed. So if you think about most customer experiences, there's a leap of faith. You're purchasing, you're taking part in the product or service, and the outcome is not guaranteed. So you're relying on that brand or product or service to deliver on that. I think that that also relies on an expectation as well. And trust is really important because often as consumers, we can't control that outcome. I think there's fundamentally how we communicate the importance of emotion within an organization. If I was to ask any CEO of any Fortune 100 company, how important is trust to your customers, understanding how trustworthy you are to your customers. And, most board statements are very much about, trust as a key pillar. So it's really, um, providing a kind of way to measure that and quantify that for the first time.
No, I agree, and you brought two thoughts to mind for me. So, thinking about from a customer experience design point of view, one thing that the discipline always talks about is about sort of meeting expectations of customers, and it's one of the things that um, is often challenged. When you go back a little bit in time, when brand was brand as opposed to brand being experience now, but when brand was just um, you know an image that you build of an organization, there were often instances where you could very easily mismanage a customer's expectations about the service or the experience that they would receive, and that straight away is a um, an impact on trust. So I totally agree with the expectation thing. And the second thing, I think, when we begin to look at what's happening around us in the world now and in the future, when you have more machines, more automation, more AI getting into the loop of the service system, then we are all naturally, a lot more nervous about that, and about, how our information is being held, how it's being used. What does the system know about us? What does it say about us? So it feels like, in a world where we are nervous anyway, in a sense of a heightened tension about what technology means to us and our jobs and our future, that trust becomes ever more fragile. And it feels like, particularly in an AI world where speed and efficiency is going to be a standard, it's actually the organizations that we trust the most are the ones that are going to really win out.
Yeah, and look, we've done numerous studies where we've been able to identify that trust is one of the key leading indicators, not only for stock price. We've done a study where we looked at the infamous United Airlines, where they involuntarily deboarded one of their passengers, and we saw that as trust decreased, not only from customer and employee perspective, but obviously stock price went down as well. So it's trying to connect what is a fairly kind of fuzzy area of, psychology to hard business context, and bring those two things together.
So we now have this ability to measure and to kind of put a number against trust. Could you very briefly, without getting super technical, how does this work? How do you do this? How are you actually able to begin to put a number behind something and see that within an experience?
Yeah, I mean, the really simple idea, and this will speak to all the CX professionals that stare at Excel. Every month they get their survey results back. So if you think about, in your NPS feedback, you will have a number on a scale of 0 to 10. You will also have a comment. One of those rows represents one customer. That is, Ben, who goes into, if we're to look at Starbucks, goes in to Starbucks every morning and is spending, a couple of dollars on a cup of coffee. And he does that over a period of a month. And his feedback is saying, well, actually, rude staff and uncleanly store and all the rest. Now, the advances in AI can understand the semantic meaning of what is actually being said. And then we're a spin out of Queen's University here in the UK, where we have developed a way to quantify emotional intensity, so we can detect the levels and strength of the intensity in that text. And then we're using fancy algorithms then to quantify what's actually at risk based on what they said and the actual metric number they've provided. So what that allows you to do is to think about, each row providing a value, and the sum of that value can be then represented as your overall customer base. So then you can identify actually root staff collectively across all your customers is driving, potentially 10 million of, customer revenue impact. And suddenly you start to set up and go, well, actually, we need to, roll out some training on empathy and really think about how we improve this. So it's really giving you a level of prioritization. I think prioritization from a customer perspective, from really putting emotion at the center for your decision making, but then putting a number to that by linking the value of trust and risk associated with customer revenue impact.
I've seen this at work, and it is incredible. And the thing that is amazing about it is its ability to kind of, you know, ingest all those comments, all that data, and the speed at which it can turn it around very, very, very quickly. It almost feels like, you can be getting out almost daily, weekly reports and seeing how things are fluctuating with various initiatives. And you're getting out from that very strong recommendations about actually what to go forward with and why.
Yeah, and I think, where we see this going is that, CX was rear view mirror from a survey, reflection on experience. It needs to get more prescriptive and predictive. So, to give you an example, we've worked with one of the largest North American telecoms, analyzed 20,000 survey results. Without getting the churn details, we were able to predict with 86% accuracy the levels of churn. When we incorporated their actual churn metrics, that went up to 99%. Ollie, we have partnered with a number of customers, one of them being Value Retail. Now, Value Retail, for your listeners, is a world leading organization across 12 destinations and 9 countries. Now, what they're doing is they're collecting the shopper experience in pretty much real time. So people go in, have an amazing experience at one of their villages, and then they complete some feedback. What we're able to do with that information is give them a prioritized revenue list of things to improve to actually drive spend per visit. Now, that helps the customer and it also helps Value Retail. So it's more a practical example of, actually driving spend per visit by improving experience.
It's amazing. And can you so you can see things like spend per visit. You then mentioned about predictors of churn. Are there other sort of really kind of key behaviors you can see coming out from the data that you can kind of predict things are going to happen in the future?
It's a great point, and often if you think about traditional measures such as NPS, you're kind of fixed with a recommendation. And my point is align the CX metric and outcome to the actual business objective. So in the case of Value Retail, it's spent per visit. We work with HealthScope, which is one of the largest private hospitals in Australia. They're wanting to actually improve patient care, and we were able to predict in one um, example where we identified that blood pressure cuffs were driving, 15% less trust. And what we found was that the nurses were putting the blood pressure cuffs on too tightly. And for the patients walking out of that experience, they actually had bruises in their arms. And what it was really simple. The sizing has a color coded label in the cuff that would tell you what the fitting was. Now, the organization, HealthScope, thought, oh, there's a problem with the mechanics of the blood pressure system, but it was actually understanding how the patients felt to then improve that, and they were able to solve that. Now, this has been adopted throughout that organization. They have a driving trust, pretty much real time system that on average is driving a 14% increase on their traditional metrics of net promoter score. So we're not saying replace net promoter score because, if we're to look at even earning calls and for Fortune, 500 companies, actually the mentions of net promoter score has gone up threefold. So it's about how do you work with the operational metrics that are in play and to give them a better prescriptive view of the drivers that will actually retain or grow customers.
And with trust being absolutely key. But you mentioned in that example of the Australian hospital um, that they were going after care. So you can determine other emotions beyond trust.
Yeah, very much so. So, our pedigree is in emotion AI. As I said, Queen's University are world famous for the W3 standards, which is the tagging of emotional online. So we have a a really fantastic background on that. So we use an intensity model that can quantify across 8 emotional indexes, everything from joy to trust to anger. So in the example of health scope, we're actually thinking about how does this actually improve patient care once they leave the hospital. So we're actually thinking about can we link emotion to actually how patients recover? And we, in the case of hospitals, we know the patient experience, if they get a better patient experience, they actually, all the academic studies point to people getting better quicker. So, my challenge often to CX leaders is to think about what is the outcome you're trying to deliver, and then kind of work backwards to even think about how you're measuring that, how you're structuring that, even from the types of data that you're getting now. We're talking about surveys in most of our conversations now, but we are analyzing for one of the largest insurance companies in the world about 20 million rows coming out of their contact center. And Ollie, you very much know about journey mapping and thinking about the peak end rule and thinking about their reflections at different touch points. Contact center and transcripts gives a really rich experience, particularly for insurance, when it's often when they most need the experience that they lift the phone to get support. So it's kind of that make or break experience that you can really capture in these channels. So um, I would love for your reflection on brands that are undifferentiated. How can measuring trust really create that new differentiation that you advise in your work organizations about how they reimagine the experience based on trust?
No, exactly. I think that's what's becoming, increasingly apparent, is that the sort of the dimensions that are driving um, customer behavior is changing, and particularly when you see what's been happening over the last few years, and what will continue to happen, uh, as you mentioned before, about with technology, the usual things that people would have, felt important, be that, the cost of something, speed, accuracy, etc. Um, the differentiators of those between services and experiences is really, really narrowing, and there's going to become a time when, everything is as fast and as accurate as anybody else, and then you're asking yourself, well, why would you go to one business over another? And it has to be that connection that you have with them. um, and this is also, I think, the thing that is facing a lot of organizations as they do begin to, and particularly, let's say, contact centers, about, when technology does begin to present that sort of that first line of response, you begin to lose all that connection, that human connection that you have with the organization. um, and when you've lost that, then customers are essentially adrift. Why should I go here? Why should I go there? And the thing that is going to connect them to them is demonstrating that we really understand you. We are able to predict what you need, proactively serve you, and basically gain your trust to kind of come back time and time again. I think, as you said at the beginning, it is the most fundamental human emotion. I mean, it's what connects us to our friends and to our family. It's having that confidence that what you expect to happen will happen, and knowing that those people, those businesses have got your back. It's very, very powerful. And I think also what's so powerful about it from a customer experience design point of view is, I think that it's, as you mentioned, Chris, it's something that's very human. So whoever you are, you can connect into that idea, and you can look at what you're doing, and you can say, is this thing we're proposing to do, is it going to build trust, or is it going to erode trust? And I think, in your heart of hearts, whether that's actually the case. um, uh, Chris, I was interested to kind of understand more about why you think perhaps that organizations struggle to act on this insight, because they've got, they have got so much data, so much information, but it seems to have like overwhelmed them now. Why is it? Is it just that they can't see the trees for the wood or the wood for the trees? What's happening there? Shouldn't information give them insight?
It should, and I think that's the promise of the insight industry in general. But my reflection is what I see, kind of this old world versus new world. And the old world was very much thinking of your customers as a number, metric obsession, sentiment analysis, word clouds in terms of understanding what that looks like. We need to get to this ultra high definition view of customer. And to do that, the biggest challenge, I believe, is this idea of experience revenue gap. So there's this gap between measuring customer experience and actually providing a financial impact from that experience. And this is Forrester come out with their predictions for this year. They're saying that 82% of CX pros can connect their CX metric to a business outcome. And worryingly, 61% can't identify an operational driver of customer perception. And then if you go a layer deeper, 79% aren't effective of actually using surveys. So I think that there's this moment for CX, I believe, to elevate themselves within the boardroom decisions to say, I can give you the revenue focused outcomes based on better customer experience. And I think it's moving away from metric obsession. So once you're bought into this cycle of measurement and repeating and thinking about that, really what you're doing is managing a number. Whereas where we need to flip it to is to say, here are the 5 priorities, here are the 5 things that will actually drive revenue impact. And actually, here's the return on investment if we were to deliver on those. So I think it's connecting those gaps. What that moves that from is from sentiment to emotional intensity, so you can understand and quantify trust. From word clouds to narratives, which is more about the storytelling that's really going to get people to sit up and say, this is why it matters from a numbers perspective, but also from a customer perspective. But then I think there's also this idea of, from moving NPS to kind of your next predicted satisfied customer. So what I'm saying is, let's not get rid of NPS. Let's actually use it to close what I call, the chasm that exists between understanding the number and the why and what next.
Brilliant stuff. So I guess if there's one thing to leave people with, it's probably this, that most organizations aren't they, trying to make decisions about customer experience, but they're trying to do that without being able to kind of clearly see where, as we've discussed, trust is being built or lost. So for you, Chris, for customer experience leaders out there who are listening to this, what would they be questioning right now? What should they be asking themselves right now about trust within their experience and how they work with it?
I would ask them to reflect on this question, which is, can they connect their CX initiative to bottom line impact? And I think if they start to think about that, they'll naturally then go on the journey to get better prioritization that will actually not only build trust, but drive customer revenue impact.
So I guess the question we'd have to the listeners out there is really this. Simply, where might trust be leaking in your experience today without you being able to see it? And if you could see it, what would you change first? Something to ponder. Chris, thank you so much for today. We've really enjoyed that. Looking forward to having you back on to talk more about this in the future. And to listeners out there, if you really enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and follow CXD. And just as a look ahead, in the next episode, we'll explore what it actually means to design for trust now that you can see it. Until then, all the best. Bye.